All right. Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Eric Karbowski, and I'm a behavioral health educator with MSU Extension that focuses on farm stress. And I very much appreciate you guys taking the opportunity to spend your time with me today through the Combating Stress Tactics, Resources, and Networks. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about stress and a few different things like that. But before we get into this, I'd like to share a little bit just about myself. As I shared, I'm a behavioral health educator with MSU Extension that focuses on farm stress. But I like to share that I really had no intentions of working in this setting and working in this role. But I feel very privileged that I do today. Prior to this, I worked in the behavioral health system where I supervised a program for over 10 years. But most importantly, my grandparents were farmers, and so I grew up on a farm. I married into a farming family, and I've had the unfortunate experience, both personally and professionally, to see the impact of mental health and mental illness on a family, as well as loss of life by suicide. And so I share that with you today, knowing that I don't have all of the answers, but also knowing that, hopefully relaying that message that there are a number of people that are working very hard behind the scenes to support the farmers and create resources and some of those opportunities that I'm very happy to share with you today to help get through some of those difficult times. And if you are experiencing, know where the resources are that so you can access and connect with them. And so with that, we know that agriculture is a very stressful occupation. There are a number of uncontrollable risk factors that are associated with farming. And some of that information, there's a lot of information that's available about agricultural safety, and the CDC recently released a report identifying the increased rates of suicide or loss of life by suicide in farming. And so we know that there's a lot of different stresses. We know that there's a lot of different things that go into farming. And so that's why I think opportunities like this are really important for us to talk about, share, reduce some of those stigmas that are associated to mental health, so that, if you are a farmer, we know that there's a independent culture that exists within farming. And so, but I think it's also important that if we do recognize some of the things that we're going to talk about in terms of stress and things like that, that you feel comfortable and confident enough in reaching out and accessing those supports. And so, one thing I like to share with the farmers is this notion called the agrarian imperative. And a lot of times I see light bulbs go off with farmers because they're like, okay, well, this makes sense to me a little bit more now. And really, what the agrarian imperative means is that there's such a deep rooted connection to the farmers and their land and things like that, that the thought of losing their land is means everything to them. It would be the ultimate loss. It's almost like relevant to losing a family, a loved one, or a family member. And so, sometimes when farmers are experiencing stress, oftentimes they may recognize or connect with this notion that, okay, maybe it is some of my emotions are because I care so much about this occupation, because I feel so connected to my land and things like that. And so it may make some things, situations, or even answering questions that would be, typically simple, that adds to that stress. It adds to that connection. And so when we think about stress, I always encourage everybody to do some self-reflection, get to know yourself a little bit better, because what causes stress for you the best. And so, as you're thinking about what stress looks like to you, and through that self-awareness, I would encourage each of you to take a second and think about, what does stress look like to me? What does it sound like? How does somebody that knows me really well, how would they say that I respond to stress? Do I act out? Do I get frustrated? Do I push away? Do I isolate myself? I know that even though I teach this, I know that I am a stress eater. And so oftentimes, it may not, even though um, obviously I'm very familiar with stress and signs of stress, sometimes it may take my wife to say, "Hey, Eric, have you recognized this, or this?" before I say, "Oh, okay. I didn't realize that, but now that I do, I appreciate you bringing that up to me. Now that I recognize that, I can take control of the things that I can control in terms of managing that stress." And so just take a little bit of time and think about what that looks like to you. What are some of those things that create stress in your life? What are some of those things that you can control within that? And that'll really, I think, help set the stage for some of the other things that we're going to talk about. So, some common signs of stress for people that maybe are experiencing isolated stress, or it could be prolonged stress. Oftentimes, people on the body would experience headaches, stomach aches, back aches, high blood pressure, high blood sugar. They may feel like their heart's racing, or they may feel nauseous. In their mind, they may feel anxious or angry. They might feel sad, bitter, depressed, or hopeless. And then oftentimes actions for people that are experiencing significant amounts of stress, either they can't sleep or they're sleeping too much. They either don't eat, or as I shared, I overeat. That could be another sign. We oftentimes will see increased use of substances, and that could be cigarettes, drugs, or alcohol. People may act out and break things. We may hear people that yell or scream, or people that begin to withdraw. They start pushing themselves away and isolating themselves from others. And so these are all common signs of stress that people might experience or display or feel. And so, if you do have some of those, maybe take a step back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, and what are some of those things that create stress in my life? How do I respond to those? And as you become more knowledgeable about what creates stress in your life and how you respond to them, you're better equipped to kind of start taking control of those. And so, some of those things, and we're not going to talk about these in detail today, but I like to think about the 8 dimensions of wellness as like a toolbox. Not everyone will you need, and it's not a one size fits all when it comes to stress management. But if you think about a toolbox, um, if you have the tools in there, you may not use them every day. They might not be something that you need all of the time, but they're there when you do need them. And so, in the 8 dimensions of wellness, there are physical, intellectual, financial, environmental, spiritual, social, occupational, and emotional signs of wellness. And so, as you go through and you think about different things that create stress, I would encourage you to look up some of the information about the 8 dimensions of wellness and add that into your toolbox. Add some of those coping mechanisms so that when you are confronted with stress, you have something that you can relate to. And if one works for you, stick with that. Because one thing that I've always encouraged farmers and really anybody that I've worked with, if you believe it'll work for you, it probably will. If you don't believe it will work for you, it likely won't. So I think if you focus on those things that do work for you, incorporate those, you're probably setting yourself up for success and being in the best position in terms of controlling some of that stress. And so, one opportunity that I'm really happy to share with you recently, MSU Extension created a pilot project in partnership with Pine Rest Behavioral Health for when those times happen that, maybe it is, you're recognizing that you're under significant amounts of stress. You've tried to handle and control some of those things yourself, but there's that next level of support that's really needed. And so, through this teletherapy pilot project, through MSU Extension, we're able to connect farmers and farm workers, farm families with online counseling with master's level therapists. And really, all it is essentially it's connecting farmers in the farming community, just like this platform where you would log in, you would connect with a therapist. And I think there are a lot of really cool and unique opportunities within this program. I get goosebumps every time I share it. But I think the therapists themselves want some feedback that I've received from farmers that have went through this is that one thing that really stands out to them is that the therapists that we're connecting them with have an agricultural connection or background themselves, and so recognizing that oftentimes farming isn't a 9 to 5 job, recognizing there are all these different variables that can create stress for farmers. A number of the therapists worked through or in or during the 1980s when there was a lot of farm stress associated, and so I think the feedback that we received has been very positive, and know that you're not alone if you're going through some of these fears or struggles or concerns or stress points, and that there are a number of farmers that are reaching out and engaging in this service. I'm also very happy to share that right now we do have funding available to either offset all, most, if not all, of the associated costs, and that's on a first come first serve basis. But we wanted to make sure that when we were setting this program up, that farmers weren't confronted with trying to make the decision, financial decision. Do I, put Cheerios on the table for my children, or do I access behavioral health supports? And so, right now, as I shared, on a first come first serve basis, we're able to connect essentially free of charge for the farmers to access these services. And then also the referral process is streamlined. It's been very fast. It's been very efficient. There are a few different ways that farmers can access this program. They can go to the MSU Extension Farm Stress website and look up Teletherapy. There's an anonymous online referral that either can connect them directly to Pine Rest, or I am the acting conduit for that program. So they would connect with me. I would reach out to them, get a little bit of information, and then reach out to Pine Rest. And the turnaround time has been really great for that. I did share, this is what the online referral looks like. So there's not a lot of information that farmers have to fill out. It's essentially the name, a contact method, if it's an email address, a phone number, how you'd prefer to be contacted, and then essentially that's the information that we're getting, so that we're able to do that. If you do self-refer to Pine Rest, which is absolutely an option, all farmers need to do is identify that they are working with the MSU Extension program. And so if you identify when you call in to say, I'm part of the MSU Extension Teletherapy pilot project, they'll know that you're with that, you're working with us, and that is kind of like the identifier to help offset those associated costs. And so, Kate, were there any questions as we're kind of going along? Anything that maybe we wanted to bring up or talk about?
This is super helpful, Eric, in identifying that there are resources available for folks who may not have them locally. It's a challenge sometimes to know where to reach, right? If you are struggling, or if you know someone who may be having a hard time and could benefit from resources. So knowing that there's this online platform, a simple form to fill out and connect you to some resources. Also that there's some cost assistance available on a first come, first serve basis is wonderful. And particularly also understanding that if you needed to reach directly to Pine Rest, you could do so. I think that's super helpful as well. You identified some of the indicators of stress in some ways that we could sort of combat those, obviously not being a one size fits all mechanism. And Extension has some additional great programming. Do you mind sort of dipping your toe into or talking a little bit about additional resources available to farmers or folks in general that the university has and partners may have as we traverse these challenging times throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond?
Yeah, there are a number of different resources. I'm going to speak more specifically to the MSU Extension Farm Stress efforts that we've worked on. There are a number of different articles that talk about stress. There's a number of different articles and resources that talk about, engaging with different opportunities to connect, programs that are becoming available or are available. We've also, through a recent partnership with American Farm Bureau Federation, National Farmers Union, and some of our extension partners, Farm Credit, have created a free online training that is open to the public, and that is called the Rural Resilience Training. A link to that is also on our MSU Extension Farm Stress website. And so essentially at any point, people can go in, they can register for the course. It's self-paced. So people that have exposure to behavioral health, I guess, information, or have had some education in behavioral health, may be able to go a little bit faster than somebody that this is very new and raw to. But it is self-paced. They can re-access as many times as they want, and it provides a lot of different resources, topics about, what does stress look like? What are some of those national resources that are available to help somebody that's in need? And also, when we're thinking about the teletherapy program too, a number of referrals have actually came from people that are concerned about maybe farmers. And so if we think about, if it's not myself, or maybe it's a fellow farmer, I think that is another opportunity. Maybe my spouse is experiencing some significant stress. And so, reaching out on their behalf sometimes can can start that process. It can open those lines of communication. So I think that's just another kind of angle or approach as you're thinking about stress. If there is somebody that you're concerned about, reach out, access some of those resources that I said are available on the MSU Extension Farm Stress website. And that could be really the first step to helping that person overcome some of those and take control of some of that stress that's in their life. So thank you. And so kind of going along with that, oh, was there another question, Kate? Okay. All right. And so kind of going along with that, obviously one of our big concerns and as we talk about and trying to reduce the stigmas around mental health, there's also a lot of stigmas and concerns about suicide prevention and suicide awareness. One of these, the national hotline or lifeline, I'm sorry, for suicide is the 1-800-273-TALK or 1-800-273-8255. I think this is a good resource for somebody that might have concerns about somebody that's thinking about taking their life by suicide. And I share the example that if you are out there maybe working with somebody and you're showing those concerns, a simple way to do this could be just say, Eric, I'm really concerned about you. I know that you've had a lot of stress. Are you thinking about taking your life by suicide? And if Eric says yes, having this tool, having this resource, just saying, Eric, I really appreciate that you shared that with me. That was very brave of you. I'm obviously not equipped to support you in this, but would you be okay with me calling this lifeline? Once I get you connected, I'm gonna hand you my phone and then I'm gonna step over here so that they can help support you with those services, help get you connected, get a plan in place. The biggest thing we don't want to do is leave that person alone. Say, Eric, you have all of these things going for you. We're gonna get through this together, and I'll give you a call tomorrow to make sure everything's okay. Especially in that moment, or if it is more of a hostile situation, feel free to call 911, get some of those other supports involved. The last thing we want to do is leave somebody that's in that position alone. Help them, connect them with those resources, maybe take them to a healthcare provider to just help them get that plan in place to help them, help support them. And so unfortunately, this does happen, but I think it's also important too, as listeners and supporters of this, to know what this resource is and know that in that moment, if you're confronted with that you have tools, that you have some of those resources that can be of support to help that person in need. Some additional resources. There's a Center for Rules of Fair. There's also a national crisis text line. So if you text 741-741-GO or help, that is similar to like the suicide call-in lifeline, but this is a texting platform. And so you're able to connect with a person that's equipped to handle those situations through texting. And so that can be another good resource. There's also the Iowa Concern Hotline. That number is 1-800-447-1985. Mental health first aid, that's a training that is offered. You know, Michigan State University Extension has some opportunities to do that, but there are a number of different providers that can offer mental health first aid training. And again, that's a great opportunity to get a better understanding of what mental health is. What are some of those concerns? What are some of those available resources? And so if that is an area of interest for you, I'd definitely encourage you to explore those a little bit further. As we shared, there's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. We talked about that. There's also a Veterans Crisis Line too. And I have called a number of these just because I think it's easy to refer people to a website, or to a link or to a call-in number. But I've actually personally called in just to make sure that I know what I'm referring people to. And so, there may be some prompts to this. There is also the opportunity to have this translated to other languages too. So if that is a barrier or potential barrier for somebody that you're working with, know that those options are available as well. And so I guess with that, Kate, are there any other questions at all before we move along?
I think the only additional question that I have listening to the presentation, Eric, is we talked about how we help someone who maybe we have concerns about. Could you just briefly for our reference, name like 2 to 3 things that might seem off or might be, sort of a clue that someone's struggling. And how can I, beyond calling that lifeline and staying near them, is there a couple of tips that you have for someone in that situation, how they could handle it? Um, Big picture.
Yeah. So somebody that might be considering taking their life by suicide, we may see, there's a number of different indicators that we would want to watch out for. Oftentimes, you may see people start pushing themselves away or isolating themselves, and so example might be maybe there's a group that meets weekly for coffee, and they have that opportunity to connect with their peers. Well, now it's been a week. Now we know that they've been under some stress. Now maybe it's been 2 weeks, maybe it's been a month since Eric showed up to those meetings. That could be an indicator that somebody is experiencing significant amount of stress. They may be considering suicide, and that's a good opportunity for us as peers to reach out to them to just say, "Hey, Eric, I noticed that it's been a month since you've been to our meetings, and you're usually there every week. Everything all right?" So that could be one. Another one could be oftentimes we'll see people start giving away prized possessions. And that doesn't necessarily have to be like a big monetary check that randomly comes out of the blue. It could be as simple as like a family heirloom belt buckle that Eric, kind of randomly gives you. Like, Eric, well, I know this was your great grandpa's. Why are you kind of out of the blue giving this to me? And so we may see people giving away prized possessions. Oftentimes in the agricultural community, we won't see people that are reaching out or purchasing maybe like lethal weapons or things like that. A lot of times they have access to those, but we may want to ask them, do they have a plan if they have shared that they're thinking about taking their life by suicide? A lot of times we may see that. We may see people kind of randomly saying goodbyes to people. And you may see them experiencing periods of highs to low or lows to high too. Like saying, "Hey, Kate, I really appreciate getting to know you over these last couple of years. We've worked together, but I know I've been under a lot of stress, but I finally have a plan figured out." And if that's kind of random and out of the blue, that could be one of those warning signs that we would want to look out for. And then I think the second part of your question, really, how do you handle those situations? What do we do? I think the biggest thing is as I shared earlier, don't leave that person alone. Um, ask them directly, are you thinking about taking your life by suicide? And this can be really hard for people. Um, you know, but asking somebody if they're thinking about hurting themselves may generate a different response if you're thinking about taking your life by suicide. So, you may want to practice, put that. I always encourage people to just, if you haven't said the word suicide or you haven't put yourself in that position before, just saying the word suicide, maybe take a second and just say, are you thinking about taking your life by suicide? And that can really be, um, emotional. I know, but I also know from experience, and this is another goosebump moment. Last year, about this time, we had the opportunity to present an in person facilitated training for the National Farmers Union representatives and as well as American Farm Bureau Federation representatives. And in those meetings, a lot of times it was hard for people to say, "Are you thinking about suicide? Um, are you thinking about taking your life?" And but in the same breath, the same things that we used later ended up helping save a farmer's life because that person, I had the opportunity to do a podcast with somebody that actually went through that training, went back to their office, and were confronted with those very scenarios that we worked through. And through that, they said that they were able to stay connected with that farmer that was in a hostile situation. They were able to access and engage them with the same supports that we just talked about. And then they were able to save their life. And so, these things can work. I hope for everybody that you're never confronted with that situation. But I also think too, and believe very strongly that, as we go through, and if you can access some of these resources, you really can make a difference and you really can save somebody's life. So I think the big takeaway is know the resources that they're there and that are available. Be able to access them if you need to, and just don't leave that person alone. And if it's something that you feel like is outside of your control, call 911. Call the proper people to help save them, help keep them in a safe place. So, um, With that, I also wanted to share that through MSU Extension, we were the recent recipients of two different grants. One is the MDAR grant, and the other one is with Fransan, with our Fransan network. And we're calling it the Legacy of the Land. And through this, there are a couple of key offerings that I would, really encourage people to A, be aware of, but B, if you think it can help your farm or your operation to access them through this. Some of the highlights are that we're offering farm financial analysis for farmers. Um, that within that, there's business management strategies. We have the teletherapy program, and as I shared earlier, those funds to help offset those associated costs came from this, and so we're very appreciative of that. We also have a number of farm stress resources, as I shared the rural resilience training earlier. That is one that's available. We continue to keep our MSU Extension Farm Stress website updated with current information and resources. And we're also providing a number of different participants the opportunity to attend mental health first aid free of charge. And so through those grants, if your business or your farm could benefit from any or all of these resources, please feel free to reach out. There are two links at the bottom of the page. There's the MSU Extension Farm Stress website or the MSU Extension Farm Management website. And there's a lot of different information about the benefits to farmers within those grants too. Any questions on that at all, Kate? No. Okay. Well, as I shared earlier, please feel free if there's anything that I can do to help support you, or if you have any questions on any of the information that we talked about today. All of my information is available on the MSU Extension Farm Stress website. And know that there are a number of people that are working very hard behind the scenes to support the farmers and the agricultural community as they continue to support us. And so we're all in this together, and we appreciate what you do.